Hey guys, Coach Barreline. We're going to continue our discussion of the we're going to start a discussion of the post-Civil War period today, and we're going to talk about Reconstruction and also the American move west. And really, the Reconstruction period falls into a few different categories. And the first phase of Reconstruction was presidential Reconstruction. Lincoln had, even as early as 1863, issued a proclamation of amnesty and Reconstruction, which offered forgiveness to all Southerners who had pledged loyalty to the Union and supported emancipation of slaves. He also developed what becomes known as the 10% plan. It said once 10% of the southern states' voters took an oath of loyalty, they could organize a new state government which had to ban slavery for readmission to the Union. Now, many members of Congress thought that readmitting states to the Union was only a power of Congress, and the president couldn't make his own plan to do that. Some believed that the South never officially left the Union in the first place because it was illegal, so they didn't need to be readmitted at all. Others thought the southern states should have to go through the same admission process that territories had gone through. Congress came up with its own plan called the Wade-Davis Bill, which was a much stricter plan and required a majority of the state's white men to pledge an oath of loyalty, not just 10%, 51%. And it was vetoed by President Lincoln, who thought it was too harsh. Unfortunately, before Lincoln could carry out his ideas on Reconstruction, of course, he was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth just weeks after the Confederate surrender at Appomattox. He didn't live long enough to carry out his Reconstruction plans for the South. After becoming president, Vice President Andrew Johnson, who actually was a Democrat from Tennessee, had the responsibility of Reconstruction hoisted upon him. Now, he was not as aggressive towards the South as congressional Republicans would have liked. In fact, he really dishated the planter elite. He really disliked the planter elite, but not the South itself. So Johnson followed a path similar to Lincoln with a few changes. He added wealthy Southern men to the list of those who needed to be pardoned. He did not, according to the more radical Republicans, provide enough of a role for in the government for freedmen or those people freed from slavery. Most of his ideas were welcomed by white Southerners who were allowed to form state governments on their own terms. Former Confederates often took state offices and were even sent to Congress. And what you have started happening is these southern states began passing black codes. And these were laws limited to keep freedmen in a dependent position and providing cheap farm labor. You also had the rise of terrorist groups like the Ku Klux Klan, who were the unofficial enforcement arm of the black codes and terrorized blacks and their supporters throughout the South. Now, most Northerners supported a more moderate approach until the black codes and former Confederate leaders returning to political power really caused them to question it. And this strengthens the radical Republicans who wanted a much stronger, more aggressive Reconstruction program to reshape Southern society, both politically, economically, socially, and all of that. After Congress reconvened in 1866, moderate Republicans proposed two bills for Reconstruction. The first created the Freedmen's Bureau, which would help former slaves and poor whites in the South build schools and get economic aid. The second was the Civil Rights Act of 1866, and this gave African Americans basic citizenship rights and guaranteed them the same rights as white Americans. Both bills passed Congress, but Johnson vetoed them, leading moderate Republicans to help the radical Republicans take over Reconstruction. And then you have the movement into the next phase, Congressional Reconstruction. Congressional Reconstruction is often called Radical Reconstruction, and basically they passed the Civil Rights Act of 1866 and the Freedmen's Bureau over Johnson's veto, and then Congress passed the 14th Amendment, which requires states to grant citizenship rights to everyone born or naturalized in the United States, and establishes the policy or the doctrine of equal protection of the law. So radical Republicans gained enough votes to take over Reconstruction and basically push the president out of the driver's seat. So they had three conditions for readmission. States to be readmitted had to ratify the 14th Amendment. They had to write new state constitutions that guaranteed freemen the right to vote, and they had to form the new governments had to be elected by all male citizens. They also passed the Tenure of Office Act in 1867, requiring the Senate's permission to remove any official that it appointed. So the president couldn't just fire cabinet officials. And this was tested by Johnson when he fired Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, and as a result, the House voted to impeach him. The Senate lacked one vote for the two-thirds majority required that they needed to remove Johnson for office. So Johnson becomes the first president impeached, but does not wind up removed from office. So in the 1868 election, war hero Ulysses S. Grant runs. He wins in a landslide on the backs of 500,000 African-American votes. And very shortly after that, Congress proposed the 14th Amendment, which protects the African-American male voting rights. So Congress is taking control of Reconstruction, and discrimination slows, and the black codes begin to be repealed. However, many white Southerners were not happy with the Northern influenced federal government's power in their regions, and white Southerners who supported Reconstruction were often called scalawags or scoundrels by other Southerners. And generally, you're talking about farmers who wanted the wealthy classes' power, people that had been destroyed by the war, business leaders who wanted to develop the Southern economy. Also, you had Northerners coming south called carpetbaggers, and they came from different backgrounds as well. You had teachers, politicians, firefighters, Freedmen's Bureau officers, former soldiers. Many of these carpetbaggers are black Americans from the North, which is not very popular, obviously, with Southerners. So the freedom of slaves meant that former slaves could move freely. Many searched for long-lost relatives that had been sold away. They sought to buy land, have jobs of their own choice. Many moved to urban areas, mainly southern cities like Atlanta, but it does cause a migration from rural areas to the northern cities. Some go west. Many wind up being cowboys. In fact, some estimates say as many as 1 in 5 cowboys were black. Freed slaves sought out education in large numbers. The Freedmen's Bureau alone started more than 4,000 schools throughout the South. And African Americans also established churches, trade associations, fire departments, mutual aid societies, all manner of things to help one another. Unfortunately, new ways of economically exploiting African Americans and poor farmers in general developed. You had sharecropping, where people received a share of their employer's crops, and the employer provided land, shelter, seeds, animals, and tools, and the sharecropper provided the labor. This is different from tenant farmers, where people rented their land from landowners and could grow any crop, but they had to pay for the rent. Many of these sharecroppers and tenant farmers suffered great economic deprivations. They didn't make much money very often, and it was grueling, backbreaking work, in many cases not much different from what they had done as slaves. And throughout Reconstruction, there's a large amount of discontent. The Ku Klux Klan and other similar racist terrorist groups, prey on blacks during this time. They beat people who teach blacks. They beat people who try to register blacks to vote. All of these things are rampant throughout the South. And state governments can't enforce the law, so Congress passes the Enforcement Acts. It basically says it's a federal offense to try to keep somebody from voting. They also gave Army and the federal courts the power to punish Klan members. However, most people are unhappy with construction. The Army still had to keep peace in the South. African Americans had persistent poverty, and many people felt like Reconstruction governments were corrupt. And as a result, a more moderate or liberal wing of the Republican Party takes power in 1872 and helps the Democrats win back Congress. Slowly but surely, Reconstruction dies out, really. Its fiercest leaders, Thaddeus Stevens, Charles Sumner, had died, and basically there was nobody really beating the drum for Reconstruction. You had a number of Supreme Court decisions that weakened the federal government's ability to regulate civil rights, and Southern Democratic leaders became more and more powerful within the House and the Senate. Eventually, in 1876 presidential election, Rutherford B. Hayes was elected, basically in a deal. Republicans promised to withdraw federal troops in return for Southern Congress members' support for Hayes becoming president. And so Hayes was elected president, and that is often seen, 1877 is often noted as the end of Reconstruction.